Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you about is the process of the stop work order release. So at this point, the investigators showed up. They've given you a stop work order. They've also given you a request for production of business records, which is what they're going to use to conduct their 2-year audit. They're going to attempt to have you provide records. Again, as I've said in these videos before, you don't have to provide records. There is another penalty calculation methodology, and I will get into that. But for right now, we're going to talk about what it means to get the stop work order release, what's required, and what to expect. Okay? So the stop work order means you can't work. If you work through a stop work order, you could be charged with a third-degree felony and a $1,000 penalty for every day you violate a stop work order. So if you have a stop work order and you go, oh, I've just got a little bit of time on Monday of next week. I'm just going to try to get this job finished, and I'm going to go out there and do the work. The state will never know. Well, you may be right. The state may never know, and they may never catch you. But if they do, you can be assured they will issue a $1,000 fine for that day you worked on Monday, and that's the best case scenario. In addition to that, they could also refer you to the Division of Insurance Fraud, who might show up at your client's house and investigate whether or not you were there on Monday and actually talk to the homeowner and say, listen, I'm going to put you under oath. Was your contractor working that day? Well, I can assure you that if the homeowner is facing either telling the truth or possibly being arrested for perjury, they're probably going to go with telling the truth. So you very well could be arrested for that, and that would cause a whole nother issue for you. So it's best not to work through a stop work order. I don't care who tells you that it's okay. It's not allowed. It's illegal. Be very careful with that. Okay. So back to the release aspect. So let's assume you're not working through the stop work order and committing a third-degree felony, and that you're actually going into the division and saying, hey, look, I have a stop work order. I'm here. I'd like to get released. I'm motivated to go back to work. Okay, so what do you need? Well, first you need to call them and say that I want to get back to work and I'd like to get my stop work order release. Now, you can come into compliance and they will allow you to be released. Now, what does that mean to come into compliance? Well, that means you have to remedy whatever it is under the law that caused you to receive the stop work order. And that means you have to have insurance, an exemption, the right amount insurance, or some other coverage that allows you to come into compliance under 44107. Okay? So you need to present to them if you can't get insurance, then you can come into compliance through filing of an exemption. So let's say you're the only officer on your corporation, or let's say that you're on the corporation and you have a friend that helps you from time to time who's not an officer of the corporation, who doesn't have an exemption, and that's why you got the stop work order. You could just make him exempt by adding him to your corporation or limited liability company and say, look, I want you to come on and work with me in my company. And so instead of just being a part-time helper, would you be a part-time officer where we work together when I have jobs? And he can say, yes, I would love to do that. And so you can file an exemption on that employee's behalf, and you can come into compliance through filing of the exemption. You don't need to get workers' comp because you had that one employee that was out of compliance, but you remedied that by providing the exemption to the department. Okay. Now, another way is you, the same individual with your company, could get a standalone policy, which is where you get a standard workers' compensation policy on the voluntary for-profit market, where you go through underwriting and they issue a policy. And once you have that insurance certificate, you can provide that insurance certificate to the department, and then they will have to give you a stop work order release for coming into compliance through insurance. Okay. Now, you can do the exact same thing by hiring an employee leasing company that will enroll your employees through their payroll service, and they will lease them back to you as a co-employer. And through that partnership, you will gain tax benefits frequently, and also you will obtain workers' compensation, which is what you need to get your release. So you would also issue a certificate of coverage showing that you have engaged an employee leasing company to provide workers' compensation and other payroll services. And that employee leasing company would send a accord certificate to the department evidencing that you have the proper amount of workers' compensation. But unlike a standalone policy, in addition to this accord certificate evidencing the proper amount of workers' compensation, they will also ask you to provide an up-to-date current payroll roster showing that everybody on that job site is now on your payroll leasing policy by name because they're being paid to that individual. And if that individual is not listed on your policy, they are not covered. So that's the difference between a standalone and employee leasing to get a release. You have to show the actual roster showing that the people on the job are on the roster in order to get the release. Now, if you have some people that are not qualified to be on a roster, let's say that they represented to you that they were citizen nationals of the United States, or they had their temporary work card, but you find out they don't, and they don't have citizenship or some issue like that, then you will have a problem getting them on the roster. So in order to get a release, you're going to have to do something with those people. And what that most likely means is that you're going to have to issue a letter of termination that you provide to the department if you cannot get them covered, because the department's going to want to know that these people will no longer come on your job site unless they're insured. And if you cannot provide that at your stock recorder release meeting, they're going to want you to write a handwritten letter, usually, that states that you will not employ those individuals anymore, and as of the date of the meeting, they are now terminated. So those are the ways you can come into compliance, and those are the only ways.